That's it. That's what the severity is.
So like how often are you using or how much? Are you
Yeah.
using?
Like, okay, as an example. This year, I've noticed, we've actually dealt with, just in fall term alone, 4 people that were basically doing like a fifth a day and have been doing that for years. Sometimes deciding to go cold turkey and then seizing up in, say, auto shop or whatever, right? That was normal behavior for them. Now, that level of severity applied within this model means, no, you need medical detox, because going cold turkey will kill you. You can't go cold turkey from Xanax if you've been taking Xanax regularly for a week. It could kill you, right? But people don't know that because, oh, well, it's a prescription drug and therefore safe and et cetera, right? So, or they have been given, for example, it's very common with vets and very common with other folks, people coming from combat, to be scripted with 15 different types of meds. And then how do I come off of those? And which ones do I come off of? Don't go cold turkey, okay? We can't prescribe. We can't ethically argue you off your meds, but part of the addiction severity and treatment intensity, well, where that relates to is, okay, if you're detoxing from an opiate, we don't recommend you do that on an outpatient basis, because it's intense to go through. I mean, people do it. Look, people detox themselves under bridges. Yes, we've had homeless people, like homeless students on the methadone program here. We get all kinds, right? So, no, don't go cold turkey from methadone under a bridge. But people do it anyway. Medical detox is definitely indicated. So that's part of it. The severity of the addiction, like, can you go cold turkey safely? Depends on the drug, right? And then the treatment intensity has to deal with the level of care that's in the particular setting. Like, everybody has a nurse if you're inpatient. Right? Outpatient, well, you're just seeing a counselor. There may be a medical person available depending on the treatment agency, but generally they don't. So there are certain things you can handle on an outpatient basis where the person, just visits the clinic 2 or 3 times a week.
So if somebody was about to start Xanax or something like that, how do they know if they need it, though?
Well, you can only get Xanax if it's not a street drug, which that happens too, right? You can only be scripted Xanax, but people get it, right, to get high.
Yeah.
So theoretically, you should only be getting it from, a psychologist or a medical doctor.
Yeah, because we spoke about that in our coping skills class, and it was like sometimes you don't even want to start that, so you want to get a second opinion before you start that type of drug as well.
Yeah.
But that's only if you know that.
Right.
Doctors don't tell you that when they
Yeah,
write
the doctor don't
Yes.
tell you that.
I mean, right. And again, that's another thing too, right? So ethically, they're supposed to tell you. It's called the doctrine of informed consent. If you remember that from last year. Doctrine of informed consent. It's not a law. It's an ethical practice. And basically what it means is that you have the right to know as a patient, and they have the duty to inform you of the risks and the benefits of any particular therapy. Usually what docs do, since they're limited to 15 minutes, is they'll just script you, give you a patient insert. You're supposed to read that, assuming that you can read technical medical level English. Yeah.
So here, client symptoms is based off the symptoms that the DSM has?
Right.
Okay.
And ASAM criteria too.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so clinicians use severity to determine levels of care appropriate to the needs of the client and also their needs. So in the real world outside of academia, treatment is not equally available even if you meet certain diagnostic criteria. That's a reality. So as an example here, Addiction severity is the seriousness of a client's symptoms and degree of impairment. Impairment would be defined as not just how loaded you are, but how physically addicted you are, and what will happen if you stop using. So as an example, lowest level of treatment intensity is level 1 outpatient, 2 times a week, plus 12-step meetings is the usual thing. Level 2, intensive outpatient, that's what IOP means. So it's almost like partial hospitalization, 3 times a week plus meetings. Level 3, residential inpatient, 7 to 28 days, depending on what insurance will pay for. Also 90, that is 3 months to 6 months, long-term residential, where you're basically living at the facility and basically, going through as much as a 12, you're living at the facility 24/7 for 3 to 6 months. And however they fill your time, which they tend to fill your time fairly regimentedly. And then level 4, medically intensive inpatient, where basically it's not just the substance that you're dealing with, but your levels of use have impaired you such that you need a more intensive medical intervention while you're in treatment. So you might have an underlying disease condition in addition to the addiction that needs to be treated.
Like your organs are shutting down.
Like your organs are shutting down.
What about like a drug has caused you to develop schizophrenia that's unmanageable without being on the drug?
Right. That too.
Okay.
Well, they would have to diagnose that. And that management, if they're not going to manage you chemically, i.e. some form of, I hate to be pejorative, but that's where it's at, chemical straitjacket, they have to dope you up to essentially manage you because you can't self-regulate. That's where the Thorazine comes in, and other things that are more. The Thorazine shuffle and the Stelazine stump. A little optional black drug counselor humor. Anyway. Right, so those kind of folks where they're essentially managing your behavior because you're unable to self-regulate, because you're not in touch with consensus reality, shall we say. So, the last question then, what are your symptoms, SX, and complicating medical conditions? As she pointed out, your organs are shutting down or have shut down, right? So you don't have a liver, you're not long for this world. Kidney dialysis we could deal with, but it's not fun.
You're this close to liver dialysis.
Yeah.
I've been following it.
Okay. So, now, that's the basic matrix. That's what's available. Now, again, treatment availability, if you're indigent, if you don't have money, if you're not insured, and depending on what happens, we're setting up these health exchanges under ACA, Affordable Care Act. It's going to basically take effect next year. What's that going to look like in terms of access? We're hoping we're going to be able to cover millions more people, or in our case, hundreds of thousands of more people, or at least thousands of more people in Oregon, but yeah. So, rarely did addiction severity actually get matched with appropriate treatment intensity because of managed care. Back in the day when it was called managed care, so if you have the money, we manage the care. If you don't have the money, we don't. So those conditions still exist. Sorry to be that cynical, but am I being cynical or real?
Real.
Just saying, okay? We'll send you to the care you can afford. Good luck. Now that might mean, and it has basically, because I'm operating in this setting, that means people who are on street heroin who do not want to go on methadone because they understand that it's a harder kick but they can't really afford, in the middle of taking a full class load, to go to Buckley House to detox for 5 days. I can't miss that. So what can you do for me? Well, gee, I wish I had our on-campus detox program like we did in, well, someplace in California. Then you wouldn't necessarily have to miss class, and we could have your class materials shipped here, and you could go through your detox and catch up. But best I can do is write you a note if you want to go through Buckley. Oh, I can't afford to do that. All right, so then it's a maintenance dose of street heroin. Hope your connection's good and your shit is clean and you're getting a consistent dosage, which can't guarantee. I also can't ethically suggest to people who are, running out of their Suboxone or, methadone. I can't say it'd be easier to quit from street heroin. I can't ethically say that, even though they know that. I mean, they're telling me that. I know that too, but you can't suggest that as a course of action.
Don't they use heroin in other countries? Like instead of
Britain.
instead of methadone, they just use
Mhm.
heroin. It's just a consistent.
Right. Because of the whole history. We didn't do a history of drug stuff here, did we? Yeah, if you're interested, we can do that, but. Was that yes or?
Yeah.
Really? Okay, well. Yeah, let me finish this. All right, so we'll send you the care you can afford. Good luck. So can't afford care, here's a waiting list, even if you can afford care. So this you might recognize from Rasmussen, where, her book was written in the early aughts. So developing these certain concepts, enhanced treatment acceptance and counteract treatment resistance. So treatment resistance is basically the client is resisting treatment in a number of different ways. So an active intervention for treatment resistance could mean skill building, reframing, harm reduction, coaching, depending on the treatment setting. So wherever a level of intensity that you're working in and with them, they're going to resist certain aspects of your therapy. So you have to give them what they need, especially if what they need is already within them or within their grasp if they work for it just a little. So for example, then, what do you do with people with multiple symptoms? Okay, so they're not actually symptoms from the disease. They could be coping mechanisms from their family of origin or circumstances they came from. Okay, so sometimes people's symptomatology is, wait, this is all I learned. This is how the people around me work this out. This is the only thing I know. So, we may, you're criminality, you have criminogenic behavior, or, okay. If they were told, like the example I used with Kathy, you might as well drop out and go on welfare because you're not going to graduate high school. Well, wait, no, I think I'll be a West Side Crip and deal drugs and make $10,000 a month, which is more than you'll make in a year. That's the solution. I may be dead in 2 years, but hey, I've lived a vida loca. Anyway, they're not symptoms. So to the client, they're not symptoms. They're what they're living with. Okay? They're the skill set they've learned as normal. So, for example, we talked about codependent roles yet?
Yeah, to a degree.
All right, as an example. So this particular meme came from a typical alcoholic family, like there's a typical alcoholic family. All right? So here's the idea. Now, this came from, and I'm just sharing the worldview, right? So this is white upper middle class, Ozzie and Harriet, 2.3 kids, a dog, a goldfish, and a cat, white picket fence, stay-at-home mom, working dad, 2.3 kids. That worldview that generated this. Now, given that model, alcoholics tended to have more kids. Something like 5 kids on an average. I don't know whether that's sloppy birth control, whatever. I don't know, right? But the model was presented 4 kids, all right? So there are 4 typical roles then children of alcoholics may use to adapt to stress in their family situation. So super coper or family heroine or hero, note the spelling of heroine, it's not the drug, female hero. So what she does, so in this particular model, because now look at this is dated, right? This is the nuclear family family structure, right? So it's already assuming a middle class background, which obviously not everybody does, right? And it's assuming that is normal. 2 biological parents, right? And the theory then, this is one of those eye of reason things, all right, is that we used to get these handy teaching aids, so like a mobile, right? And so here's dad, here's mom. Remember, I'm not an art major, I'm a psych major. All right, and in a mobile, right, there's a balance. And let's say off of this you have girl child, boy child, girl child, boy child. So if what happens within this framework is you add a bottle, and let's say that it's dad. So this is going to weigh it down, right? It's going to throw it off balance. The presence of the bottle. And often, actually, when I acted this out doing presentation, I would basically take a chair, and by way of illustration, I'd say, okay, Bob and Gail met in high school. They were high school sweethearts. He was captain of the football team. She was the head cheerleader. They fell in love. They had kids. They had fairly average drinking problems in high school, meaning they were both binge drinkers, and they came from, multi-generational alcoholics. So let's put Bob as the primary addict on the pedestal, and let's have him look through the bottle. And when I say action, look through the bottle. And what do you see, Bob, looking through the bottle? Nothing. It's blurry, right? Precisely like alcohol, right? Action. And so what she's doing then is when he's doing that, focused in the bottle, she's supporting him. Okay? So when you see that, and you're the first kid, you're the oldest kid, what do? Well, mom and dad are engaged. That means they're not parents anymore. I have to become the parent. Boom. Back to slide. Super coper, family heroine or hero. Right? Takes over the role of the parent in the home. The outside world sees a workaholic, successful perfectionist. Driving that perfectionism is a whole lot of shame because they don't want to draw any attention to the fact that at home, dad's drunk and mom's engaged with supporting mom and not being a mom anymore, and I'm basically having to grow up and take care of everybody. So these folks will often be not only a head cheerleader, get into athletics, they'll be A students, they'll be, you know, they can actually sustain this workaholic, go-getter mode into early adulthood before they fall apart. Because it's not sustainable because they're in this particular situation, right? So the second, and it's often the second-born child. All right, there's already a family hero. So in order to deal with this particular, I'm going to be the rebel. So they'll often take, in the family structure, take the blame for the addict's use. They act out. They could get pregnant. They could get other people pregnant. They're involved with alcohol and drugs or criminal activity. Oh, you're driving your father to drink. Now, one of the interesting things with a scapegoat is they can often be the truth teller in the family, and that often gets them in trouble. But they'll be rejected for it, telling that truth. All right? The lost child. Seeing that mom and dad are engaged, there's a family heroine or hero, there's a scapegoat. The lost child basically retreats, withdrawing into a private world. In the classroom, they're the invisible kid. They're the kid that nobody notices, particularly teachers. And they have, in one sense, a vivid inner life. So any one of these folks could actually, so when I showed you that in risk-focused prevention, the 1 in 4 children of alcoholics became an alcoholic, any one of them could be. Or their chances of marrying an alcoholic are really high.
So there's not one that's more likely to be than another?
Any of them could be.
Okay.
The scapegoat most likely will not be because they don't want to be like the parent. They're rebelling. But they also could basically instead, oh, well, you're a drunk, I'm going to be a stoner. Could work that way too. There's lots of different ways for these to work out. So the lost child copes through withdrawing into a private world. The family mascot or clown. All right, so they cope with stress by laughter. It lightens the seriousness. In the blues tradition, among my people, the blues tradition talks about laughing to keep from crying. These folks will often laugh at inappropriate laughter at stressful situations. I told you the Spielberg story. No? Must have been ethnic studies. Yeah. So this meme was originally designed for alcoholic families. And it fit neatly because, okay, you got 4 kids. You could actually, and usually this appeared as birth order. So Super Coper was the first kid, Scapegoat was the second kid, Lost Child was the third kid, and the mascot was the youngest kid. Okay, because that's also often the baby, the family, the favorite, the kid that always laughs because the situation is pretty tense, so they could lighten the mood by basically laughing. Now, when these folks grow up, so for example, Carol Burnett, what's his name? Richard Titus used to have a comedy show on, I think it was Fox or something like that, where Stacy Keach was the alcoholic dad, and he basically was the comedian. Richard Pryor, right? Comedians basically talking about how screwed up their family life was as being the kid in the alcoholic family, and Richard was an only child. So I'm saying that one of the things that we've seen with these roles is even though it's said the meme is set up for being a 4-child family, we've seen these roles play out in one person over their lifetime. We've seen the roles switch. So the scapegoat becomes the family hero because the family hero fell apart, and the scapegoat became the one to take over the family hero role, all kinds of different stuff. So basically all of them can achieve recovery because they are at risk from basically marrying alcoholics, if not developing the disease themselves, because of the rules that basically come out within this particular family structure. So in this, and I can also basically point out that this meme has been adapted or can be adapted to other stressors besides alcoholism and substance abuse. Okay, so for example, in response to racism. In my family, for example, so I'm the oldest kid, you know, I'm supposed to be the example. My next younger sister basically had charge accounts at fancy stores in LA that my mom had charge accounts at, and so she basically charged all this stuff, not as my mom, but she was able to open just by saying she was my mom, right? And so we always wonder, how does Michelle have all this stuff from Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue? Why is she bringing gang members up? So it's like, you know, my brother could be lost child, and, you know, baby Leslie, you know, the family, you know, the favorite baby who becomes the doctor that, you know, I was supposed to be the doctor, right? So, and basically our major stressor was, you know, essentially, you know, the whole adapting to going from sharecropping to being middle class in one generation, and then responding, you know, to systemic discrimination, et cetera. How do you deal with that? You know, going from segregated schools to integrated schools and all that stuff. Being the only black kid in the class, yeah, all that kind of stuff, right? So chief codependent, non-using spouse role, they shield the addict, an alcoholic, from the consequences of using. If they use too, they help protect the supply. If both using, you have a dynamic with two different addicts. So, you know, just to draw that, of course, this would be even more chaotic if both of them are drinking. And then, of course, if everybody's drinking, like that client that I drew you out, and Tony Soprano. If everybody's drinking and then everybody's being scripted with psych meds, whoa. It's a trip, right? That becomes normal. Yeah, how does it become normal behavior to drink a fifth of vodka daily for years without questioning that?
So that'd be dysfunctional.
Well, and dysfunctional means not non-functional, it means functioning in the presence of great pain, right? So there's pain there, so, but nobody talks about it, all right? So as an example then, if you look at mental illness, bipolar could be a maladaptive response. So you manic depressive disorder, bipolar, can be stimulated by certain American drug cycles, for example, caffeine, tobacco, sugar, amphetamines, mania, benzodiazepines, alcohol, and then antidepressants, et cetera, Zoloft, Depakote, opiates, depression. Any of those in combination. So if you're a non-using codependent in a relationship with somebody whose mood goes up or down, or is variable depending on which drugs they're using, that pretty much simulates mental illness. And, you know, if you remember from limbic resonance, you're resonating with somebody whose mood is going up or down. How do you make a sane adjustment to that with no training? Or not even the mental framework, like the eye of flesh or eye of reason to even, what am I going through? Right? So the client is reporting these as symptoms, except to the client, they're not symptoms. This is shit that's happening to me. So don't start going all clinical, just be real with me. What's going on? Oh, well, let's hear the story. So, and there's also processes that can be maladaptive responses that are also kind of like certain forms of mental illness. So, Manic gambling, poker, day trading, gaming. So those things can do, so it's not even a substance yet. Depression, loss of any of those activities, going through withdrawal, goes up, must come down. So life naturally has ups and downs. And stabilization might mean focusing within a narrow bandwidth of experience. So drugs, that's the theory behind, in terms of the eye of reason, backed by the eye of flesh, of why we give stabilizing medications. Right? You can do that. So as an example, these are sine waves. And this is often the image we use for bipolar manic depressive. Okay? So manic above the line, depressive below. So the center line is normal, whatever normal is. So let's say normal is a narrow band around which you cycle, and you have different things that are cycling. So the idea then is to expand what normal is to encompass both the highs or lows, so you're not freaked out by either one. All right? So stabilizing drugs essentially chemically narrow the wavelength to this bandwidth. But you can actually do this with the right framework. Like a meditative framework will basically say, I can begin to detach from these highs or lows and notice that, somebody's going through this high or this low, but it's not me. And that's not disassociation, that's, I don't have to freak out about this particular situation. All right, so adaptive skills expand what is normal so that you're more responsive, less reactive. So I'm suggesting basically, since we can't talk you out of your meds, okay, we can give you a skill set that expands beyond the meds so that can encompass more and more of that wavelength, so that you operate within a framework so that you're not tripped out by certain things that occur in life. All right, so, all right, so the mind is a pattern-making and pattern-seeking device. So mental wellness is adaptability to adversity that overcomes the adversity. So mental illness in this framework is a fixed response to adversity that doesn't change when it doesn't work. Keep doing the same thing that don't work over and over and over. Wellness would be adapting, doing the stuff that works when the shit hits the fan. When the shit hits the fan, you make compost. Oh, you first clean it up, and then you make compost. So symptoms are emotions, thoughts, and behaviors that can indicate response patterns to adversity. So whether they work or not depends on whether you adapt to the adversity well enough. So our clients have become more intense because the conditions they face are more severe. So they have multiple symptoms because the symptoms are consequences of having bad things happen, or systems breaking down or being non-responsive. So many communities who have been systemically neglected have devised their own solutions, some of which have become policy. So this might be an actually decent time to do the drug law thing. So allow me, open. Removable disk. I hope it's in here. We just talked about it. Ah, yes. All right, there was a certain history that actually happened before here. How about if I start, because we only got 10 minutes, with our current drug laws? Okay. Because I can basically say this. Oops. The history of drug laws in the United States go like this. Before 1968, marijuana was a legal drug. It was a pharmaceutical drug. In fact, every major pharmaceutical house that's in existence today had a medical marijuana preparation before 1938. All of them. Okay, they were basically just alcohol tinctures. Okay, in 68, so how many of you are old enough to remember Cheech and Chong?
Yeah.
Okay, so the weed commercial, no sticks and stones that you don't need. Acapulco Gold is bad as weed. Okay, so what they were making a joke about was a real event that two tobacco companies, Philip Morris and R.J.R. Nabisco, basically trademarked two names for marijuana cigarettes in anticipation that the presidential election will elect George McGovern and marijuana will be legalized. All right, so Panama Red and Acapulco Gold. So Nixon was elected president instead of McGovern. Plans were scrapped as Nixon favored tough drug laws and conspiracy laws, et cetera, and these were used to suppress certain political movements. So the history of drug laws in the United States is kind of reactive. So if you remember about enantiodromia, the problems generate solutions, the solutions generate more problems, and part of the problem is the way you're seeing the problem. So essentially, there has been an element of racism within U.S. drug laws where the drug laws are focused on minority drug use when there's always been a larger white population that's wealthy using the problem. So the first drug law, okay, there was 250,000 opium eaters who were wealthy, upper middle class, white opium eaters that are taking the drug orally. This is when heroin was in over-the-counter cough syrup. So 250,000 opium eaters, but they passed a law against 10,000 opium smokers who were Chinese. Okay, why are you doing that? But fine, all right. Cocaine is in Coca-Cola. So they don't make that illegal until 1914, Harrison Narcotics Act, which according to National Geographic, that communist radical magazine, said that fear of Southern blacks going crazy on cocaine led to the passage of the Harrison Narcotics Act. The drug czar, Hamilton Wright, in 1904 under Teddy Roosevelt, testified that cocaine gave blacks superhuman strength and made them rape white women. Now, this isn't a time when the Ku Klux Klan is in existence and if black people are even looking at white women or even walking on the sidewalk, they could get killed. So cocaine giving us superhuman strength and making us bulletproof and raping? Not exactly. But that caused the passage of the law, and then so on. Coloreds with big lips use marijuana, induce white women to have sex using marijuana and jazz music. Like, really? This is your social policy? Wow. Okay. So here we have now the 60s. What's the 60s? So there is a reactive element to this, the thalidomide disaster, that is this tranquilizer that's given to women in pregnancy that makes monsters, right? So remember, PCP was also given to women who were pregnant during labor. Okay, the idea being it's a dissociative anesthetic with a psychedelic side effect. She's distanced from the labor. The anesthetic cuts the pain. As a side effect, she has hallucinations and retrograde amnesia, so she doesn't remember the pregnancy and what is this kid? Not helpful for the mother child bonding experience. So they stopped using it and it became a street drug. So, thalidomide disaster. So, the 60s. And the result of the 60s was the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970, also known as Controlled Substances Act. Large numbers of middle-class white youth began adopting non-mainstream minority group values, including the use of hallucinogens and marijuana as quasi-sacraments, rejecting materialism, respect for the earth, freely sharing possessions and genetic materials, of course, feminism or egalitarian relationships, nonviolent social change. We can't have that. That ain't the American way. We got to put a stop to it. How do we do it? Boom, drug law. So, what does abuse mean? So, in DSM, abuse is defined as continued use despite negative consequences, physical, physiological, social, legal, occupational, but short of dependence, which of course is addiction, as you know. Legally and conservatively, any use of an illegal substance breaks the law and leads to the schema, use is abuse, even though as far as clinically, that doesn't work for us. We need a little bit more precision. Duh, marijuana is illegal. Duh. But use of marijuana is not by itself a constitute abuse. So, Controlled Substances Act was a compromise between people who wanted criminal penalties and people who wanted treatment and rehab. 5 levels of drug control with penalties. A drug was assessed for historical and current potential for abuse and its medical use. High abuse potential and no medical use was Scheduled 1. So marijuana, peyote, LSD, hallucinogens, heroin. High abuse potential and medical use are Scheduled 2, so amphetamines, methamphetamine, cocaine, and barbiturates. And other drugs with abuse potential but lower risk, such as paregoric, which is an alcohol tincture of opium, and codeine cough syrups, fell further down on the schedule. So at the time, alcohol and tobacco were considered with the law because they had high abuse potential, clear problems, and no medical use. They were lobbied out of the original law. Right? So, Schedule 1, high abuse potential, so no medical use officially, need a government permit to produce them. Heroin, marijuana, peyote, LSD, foxy, opiates, MDMA, hallucinogens. So notice, we've never had a public health problem with peyote. Peyote is, according to Western science, not even addictive. Why is it Schedule 1? Because it's the sacrament of a people of color. Okay, there's no health, there's no abuse. People don't knock over banks for the peyote habit. Why schedule it with heroin? Morphine, codeine, methaqualone, methamphetamine. There's medical or military use, government permit, so Schedule 2. Schedule 3, lower abuse potential, non-amphetamines, chlorohydrate, diazepam, propoxyphene, and Schedule 5, basically like cough syrups and such stuff like that. So the idea basically, how do you make something illegal? Where do you make it legal? If you're going to reschedule marijuana down like it's Schedule 3, how do you work that? How real is that as a potential? So basically part of the problem is how we see the problem. So this will be up on Moodle, because I'm hearing them play the music.